I am hitting the record button. We had at least one person last time that wanted to see the video, so we are recording now. This is the fly fishing class summer 2020 at St. Andrew. And we have 4 of us here so far. And let more come in. Okay, Terry and Chris, go right ahead.
Well, you gonna play the video first or second or not?
Terry, would you like to for me to start the video first, or do you want to talk?
Oh, you can start the video first.
Okay.
Clean my lens to see if the camera.
Well, it's looking good, Terry. We can see you just fine. If it wasn't so shaky. There we go. You're good.
Clean the lens. It was one I had in a plastic bag.
Well, it's working well. We can see you.
Okay. Can you see the video?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes.
Click on full screen.
Full screen. Okay. Here we go.
And that's exactly what it is. It's going to be a series of short little episodes designed to help you become a better fly caster. You know, today, a couple more preliminary steps, and then we'll wrap up with probably the single most important tip I can give you on fly casting. And first of all, I want to talk about your stance, okay? You want to stand a little bit sideways with your opposite foot forward, just like you were throwing darts in a bar, okay? In fact, you've heard us say this before. Fly casting is exactly the same thing as throwing darts, and just pretend that you're in a bar throwing darts. That's how you should be standing. This is a stance that's going to be much more comfortable, much more natural, and it's safer. If you're in a river, wading in a river, or you're on the nose of a boat, it's going to be a much safer stance than if you're straight up and rigid like this, okay? It also allows you to turn at your torso and look behind you, because I'm going to highly recommend that you do that. We'll talk about it in the next couple episodes, but make sure that you're looking behind you, and I'm going to tell you what you're looking for, okay? The next tip is your grip. You grip a fly rod just like you're shaking someone's hand, okay? Your thumb should go on top of the cork grip, and the thumb should come as close to the end of the cork grip as possible. I see a lot of people that tell you to hold it back here, and that's simply not true. If you ever played Little League Baseball, they told you to choke up on the bat. Same thing with the fly rod. Choke up as much as you can. It's going to give you higher tip speed. It's going to give you more control over where the tip of the fly rod goes. We're going to talk about your thumb and its importance. In fact, your thumb and the palm of your hand are the two most important body parts when it comes to efficient and effective fly casting. You know, it's summer of 2019, and this means I've been in the fly fishing business and teaching fly fishing and fly casting for 30 years of my life now. And I've been really lucky over the years to have spent some time with some of the greatest fly casters of all time, many of which are going to be featured here in this series, so stay tuned. But back in 1997, I first got to work with Lefty Craig. As many of you know, Lefty was one of the greatest fly casters and fly casting instructors of all time, a legend in our sport, and I was honored to have known him and have gotten to work with him and study a bit with him on several occasions. But at one time I asked Lefty, I said, Lefty, what's the number one mistake that most fly casters will make and that you see most often? And he said, Brian, he said, everybody wants to start their cast here. He said, you watch. Everybody you ever work with will want to start the cast here. And you know what? He was right. It's uncanny. Everybody wants to lift the rod to this point to start the cast. Now, a couple of things. Your fly cast should resemble an airplane taking off a runway, okay? It should get going slowly, gradually build up speed, and then you're going to launch at a 45 or 60-degree angle, just like that, taking off the runway. If you start the cast here, you're asking your pilot to only utilize half the runway. Not going to happen. Here's another tip. Step number one in executing a proper cast is that you must get the end of the line and therefore the leader and the fly moving, okay? And you can't do that if you start here, okay? By the time you get them moving, you'll be almost at the stopping point. So if you're practicing in a field or the grass, put your rod tip on the ground to start every single time. If you're wading in a river, put your rod tip an inch under the water. If you're in a boat, put your rod tip an inch under the water to start that cast, okay? That's gonna allow you to execute the proper upcast, which we'll talk more about in the coming episodes. But number one mistake, everybody wants to start here. I think many of you are gonna chime in and realize that you've been doing this all along. And as my buddy Flip Pallet says, who's gonna join us for this series, by the way, Flip says, you're only making half of a cast. So thanks for watching, stay tuned. We've got a lot more on fly casting coming at you. Send your questions over to admin@madriveroutfitters.com. We'll be happy to answer them or get to them here on YouTube. And be sure to subscribe. That really helps us out. Oh, and don't forget to gently tap the like button. Oh, I'm kidding. Smash the hell out of it. If you like this video, hit subscribe. It helps out a lot. And check out these videos. We think you might like them too.
Well, he does a couple of things different than I do. He's probably right, and I learned wrong for however long ago. First thing is, I learned that the casting motion is probably very similar to what he said with darts, but it's like driving a hammer. And that's the way you do it. He also will talk later about moving his wrists, which I was taught never to do. When you start a cast, for me, part of what you got to do is get the line out of the water. I mean, and he's talking about starting under the water. I don't know how in the world he does that because there's just too much resistance. The other thing that I learned to do is the motion is from 2 o'clock to 10 to 12 to 10 o'clock, they say, but I've found when you're teaching somebody, you tell them to go to 12 and they'll go back to 10 automatically. And when you first start, you need to look behind you because you got to make sure that that line rolls out all the way. You won't do that after you've gotten used to it. You get the muscle memory and know how. But I don't know any other way to do it except to turn around, look, and see when it goes all the way to its full extension. Then you go forward. So, Terry, what do you think?
Well, I disagree right off the bat with what he had to say.
Yeah.
The first thing I disagreed with is good part of the time I'm standing in the river a little bit. And the reason is it gives me a little more space behind me. And the stream that he was showing is not normally the type of streams that I fish. I fish one where I fish the Bighorn and other streams in the San Juan. And so what happens, I always stand sideways to the current.
Right.
I always stand to the side, sideways. So I'm parallel to the river. If you stand like this, it exposes your waders to a larger surface area. The larger the surface area that you expose yourself, the chances of getting knocked down is much greater. So when I wade, I'm always parallel to the river. And I'm always parallel to the river for another thing. When I do turn, and I do turn when I make my cast and look to where the line is.
Right.
But I always turn and look, but I want to say something. So I'm always parallel to the river. And sometimes when I go to drive my fly or my thing, I work it back and forth up and down the river, not behind me, not forward or behind me. I stand sideways. The other thing I want to point out, yes, I always hold my thumb on top. But the reason I do that is I control my leader. the tension on the thing with my index finger.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, so when my rod's down here like this, I pull the line so there's no slack in it on the water. Now, this camera is not the best one to show it, but when I go to raise the line, I have my fingers on this part of the leader. And so when I go to lift my rod, I release my index finger like this. And when I lift the line off the water, this hand goes down to my waist. And what that does, it further loads your tippet. So I start out like here. And what I've done is I take all the slack off. I strip it on so I have no slack. So now I hold it like this. And then when I raise that tip off, this hand goes down here like this. And that further loads your rod. And then I cast it back and I look back to where it is.
Mhm.
And sometimes I will let go of this line that I had here. And the weight of the line that's going back will pull all that slack out. To pull all that slack out that I just pulled down. It'll take that with it. And then when I see it where it's want, I re-grab it like this. And then I come forward from 1 o'clock to 11 o'clock. And then I let go of this line and it goes straight out. And so you want your rod to be parallel at the worst. You don't want the line as it goes forward to hit the water. You want it all to straighten out, the fly and the leader all straighten out in the line about 3 or 4 feet above the water. And then it just gently floats down.
Exactly.
And when you let it go straight out and let it float down, but if you drop that fly rod where the line starts to hit the water, when that fly rolls out, it'll splash. Especially your grasshopper patterns or bigger patterns, it will roll out and hit. But if you roll it out, so it's straight out before it hits the water, and it'll just go down there and it won't splash.
You have to think about a fly landing on the water. It's not going to splash. If it does that, it's a dead giveaway that somebody's on the other end of it.
And then what I almost always do fishing the stream, I mend the line. And it's all right to have a little slack in it, but you roll your line over.
Mending means that you're going to roll it back, and what you're going to do is get your line behind or in front of the fly without getting a bow, so that it floats naturally. If it motorboats, if it can tell that that the fly is caught to the line and it's making a splash, that's another good giveaway to the fish that there's something on the other end of the line.
Right. So I always, almost immediately, some guys that are really good, they can mend their line before the whole flying line hits the even water. I used to be that good, but I'm not that good anymore. But so you just take the tip and you roll it over, you flip the line upstream. You want the fly to be going downstream. You don't want the line to go downstream because then it will pull the fly along. And you want the fly to be going first. And every now and then you may have to mend it more than once. You just do a little flip like this. Not enough to move the fly, but just enough to keep that line upstream of the fly.
If you're fishing out of a boat, you're going to have to mend all the time because you will cast, you will mend. And what you want to do is match the speed of the line to the best you can to the speed of the boat. The guide may take care of some of that, but you're going to have to constantly mend to avoid motorboating the fly.
Most of the time, guides that I've used on the San Juan, even the big hole, they'll drop the anchor and they'll work a run 3 or 4 times.
Right.
And so you constantly have to mend that line upstream so that your indicator, the line is not dragging it at all.
Or if you're fishing wet flies, yeah.
You do. But even in a boat, and you're standing there, you'll still be parallel to the river. There's no way.
Absolutely.
These boats today, they have a deal that you stand inside. It goes around you.
Called a pulpit.
Stand in those things. And you can't stand sideways in the thing because you want this thing wrapped around you. So generally, but anyway, you want to be always parallel to the river. And so if I'm using a dry fly, I'll shorten it up and I'll whip it up and down the field. I won't dry it over my head. I dry it this way, back and forth. And then when I get it out here, then I'll flip it out. But so that's what they didn't like right away is
The number one rule in a boat is always cast latitudinally. Never cast longitudinally, because you'll start catching other people in the guide and they'll be real unhappy with you.
right. So having your finger on top makes it easier to hold this line. This is kind of hard to do it inside. So I'm always stripping and keeping the slack out. And then when I come down, like I said, when I go those racing, I pull this. I can't really, not showing this thing because my camera. I really drop it down as I raise the line up. And then when I get up here, I let go of this thing. And the line that I pull down, it will go with the whole line and straighten out. And then you got to re-grip this line. When it's back up there, you want to keep going through your fingers like this because you got to hold that line tight. So when you go forward with the pole, the line will respond to the pole. But if you let go of that line in your
It's
path,
slow.
it just whips. The line will go forward.
The
And
two
so-
most important things that Terry said, as far as catching fish that I'm concerned with, the cast is all wonderful, but the action that you use will catch fish will be stripping, where you pull in the line, like what he's talking about. And the other thing is mending, because those are the two things that will make the fly look natural in the water.
Right. And the other thing that I do, and I learned how to do this when I bone fish down in the Yucatan, for example. When you're sight fishing for trout along the banks or even bone fishing, when you see the fish to hit it, you don't lift the rod up too much. What you do is when you see it go to hit like that, when he hits it, you strip the line back. You just strip it out. If you lift the rod up, it moves the fly too much. You lift the rod up, the whole distance that you move the rod up, if you move that rod up 6 feet, it moves that fly 6 feet. But when you get a fish on there, all you want to do to set that hook is move it about 12 inches. Just about 12 inches. So you kind of just strip it towards you to set the hook. You don't want to pull that fly out away from him.
You got to be really fast to do that. For beginners, what I learned was when you feel anything on that rod, you do a back cast to set the hook. That's totally different than what Terry's talking about, but you don't have that much time. When they hit, you got a split second. And the easiest thing to do is do a back cast. You'll set the hook. That's probably better and you'll catch more fish, but that's a more advanced technique than a beginner.
Right. But anyway, I've been fishing for a long time, so I won't lift. Most people fish as if they're going to fish a spinning rod, and they overlift the fly line. The kids think they still got a spinning rod in their hand, but fly fishermen, if they do lift the rod tip, they only lift it about a couple feet. You just go like this, and the key to it is always having the slack out of your line.
Right,
The
that's true.
the least you have to move that rod up. So if you're stripping that line and keeping the slack out of it, it doesn't take much to set that line like this. It all depends how much slack. Now a lot of people, they don't keep the slack out, and that's why the guide will have you lift it up, because the first 3 or 4 feet when he moved the rod tip was taking the slack out of his line to start with. And the last 2 feet he moved the rod tip was setting the hook. But I keep that slack out all the time. so I don't have to lift that rod very far. And then the minute I get a fly on, I keep my rod out completely straight up and down and let the whole rod tip work the action of the chop. You don't want to go straight out. You want the rod tip
Right.
fight the trout.
The most important thing that he said for a beginner, I would think, is you have the rod placement like he told you, with your thumb on the edge of the cord. The other guy said choking up, but you always have to have the line in your other hand. Okay, and you're always trying to strip as you go along.
You always taking
Keep that rod taut, to keep that line taut.
The only time you can have a little slack is when you go to mend the line.
Right.
And mend it upstream. A little slack keeps you from moving the fly, and you can just flip the line over. You can just flip the line over by flipping the tip over, which is not the best camera. But so stand parallel to the river. Don't stand sideways in a stream that's moving at all. Not good. Not good at all.
If you do that, you're going to spend all your time trying to stand up as opposed to fishing because of the current pushing you.
Right. Not a good idea. And
Nope.
in the stream he was showing you, I don't know too many streams like that in Colorado that we're going to fish. Whether it's the Blue River or the Roaring Fork or the Colorado or the Arkansas, that runs fast enough. You always want to be parallel to the river, facing the river. But you do turn your body and you watch that fly go out behind you. When that line straightens out behind you, then and the other thing is, when you look and watch that line, you can start to see the rod load up, because what the line should be doing, it should take that end of that rod and it should bend it.
Right.
It should start to bend. If you bring that line back and the line's doing what it's supposed to, it will bend the tip away from you. And then when you go forward, it will extend that bend. And then you kind of, like, maybe it's like hitting a hammer, but you got to stop at the nail. But your nail,
Yeah, well, you do when you hit the nail.
the
When you
wall,
stop.
nail in the wall, not nailing the hammer on the ground.
Right.
You're hitting the wall. And so I fish from 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock on the cast. And then when I watch my line go straight out, and when it gets parallel, my rod tip will follow the line down. But the line, you don't want your rod tip going below that line. You want it to be slightly above the line as it goes out.
But once you actually hook a fish, you want the flex in the rod to be fighting the fish. That's what it's supposed to do. You'll put too much pressure on it and yank the hook out if you try and do it yourself. So you want to keep it taut and let the rod tip do the fish fighting.
And you want to set the drag so that if the fish really wants to run, it can run.
Right.
And that's
You want to let them run?
the fish I go after is mostly, well, I like the San Juan. They run a pound and a half or better, unless you get into some stockers that they put in there. But so you adjust your drag accordingly. And if it runs too much, you can always reach down and adjust the drag.
Yep. You can also palm your reel when you need to do that.
Right.
Want to slow it down.
Down on the bottom to slow it down.
But the reality is, and we talked about this before, the fly casting is muscle memory. You know, it's like hitting a baseball. You got to do it a bunch of times to be able to do it right. And it's hard to talk about it as opposed to demonstrate it. And every rod company that I know of has casting clinics, and they want you to come out and use their rod. They're trying to teach you why their rod is better than somebody else's you can buy. And most sporting goods stores that carry fly fishing equipment will have casting clinics with the various rod companies. So I would highly recommend you go to a couple of those, and they'll have you initially, if they did it where I did it, you won't even have a fly on the end of your line. You'll have a piece of bright colored yarn that you learn how to place. Completely different than trying to do spin casting where you have a weighted object in the front. But it just takes a whole lot of practice. And like I said, it's really good if you're there with somebody who can stand behind you and show you how, now you went too far on this, you didn't go far enough on that. And that's really the way to learn to cast as far as I'm concerned.
Have them stand next to you, not behind you.
But once you know the big motion is mending and stripping. That's the most important thing. You have a tendency when you start out to get all tangled up in the line. You've got to learn how to manage that line. We ready to show the next video?
I'm ready. If you guys are ready, I'm just.
Yes.
That's Perry. I don't have anything else to say.
I'm ready.
Okay, let me go grab that video. Hang with me for a minute here, for a few seconds, how to master the roll cast.
I'll say this about roll cast before we start. It depends on what's behind you. If you're fishing like in New Mexico where there's a lot of overgrowth, you'll never do a cast. You know, a standard cast. You'll always do a roll cast. The problem is there's nothing behind. If you try and cast behind, you'll get it caught in the brush. So you always have to know what's behind you.
Makes sense. Okay, ready?
If you were only going to learn 2 casts in your whole fly fishing career, our first 2 would have to be the absolute best, period. The standard overhead cast aside, the roll cast and the reach mend are the absolute most versatile techniques that I know of. There's no doubt that those 2 casts are going to get you more fish than any others. On a scale of 1 to 10 in fishiness, both get a solid 10. The roll cast really is a special cast. It's the foundation of all spey casts, and once mastered, it opens up a myriad of really useful casts for both the single and the double-handed rod. Time after time, a well-executed roll cast is going to become your get-out-of-jail-free card. Once mastered, you'll be well on your way to learning the dynamic roll, the jump roll, the switch cast, the single spey, the double spey, and almost every spey cast there is. The roll cast is the cast to use when you have limited or no back cast room. It's also a really stealthy cast when executed well. It's also probably the most efficient way to get a fly up and back into the water and fishing again. The roll cast reduces unnecessary false casting and the likelihood of tangles and injury. It's also a really great cast for lifting up heavy sink tips and shooting heads. With practice, the roll cast can also be really accurate, and if you want a cast that's going to open up a much broader range of fishing opportunities for you, then this is it. Like all spey casts, the roll cast is a cast in 2 parts. The first being the setup and line positioning, the second, the loading move and delivery. Now you can practice this on grass or water. I find that grass is actually better for teaching as the lack of surface tension quickly teaches students to apply power smoothly. If they don't, the line simply pulls out through the grass and it won't lift. If you can do this on grass, you can do it almost anywhere. With 5 or 6 meters of line off the tip, slowly draw the rod tip back until your reel is about ear level. Your elbow should be bent slightly and the rod should be slightly canted out and back behind you. What we're looking for here is the big curve of the line hanging from your rod tip down onto the water in front of you. That sag of line is called a D-loop for obvious reasons, and it's that D-loop that does all the work in roll cast. The rest of the line that's lying on the water out in front of you should be pointing roughly in the direction you want it to travel. Remember that the standard roll cast is not a change of direction cast. Now that you have a nice D-loop formed, the rest is actually pretty easy. The D-loop is going to help load the rod against the surface tension of the line out in front of you, and it's going to lift it off the water and deliver it to the target. The second part of the roll cast is exactly the same as the forward stroke on your standard overhead cast. Power the rod tip along slightly inside and parallel to the line that you have lying on the water in front of you. Think railway tracks, keep them parallel. Accelerate forward with smooth power application.
Stop it right there.
Crisp stop.
Steve.
Smooth acceleration is the name of the game here. Think start slow, finish fast. Don't overpower the stroke. The correct amount of power is always that which just lifts the line and has enough energy to turn it over and straighten it out, not punch it into the next territory. Here are some tips.
Terry, did you say stop?
He did.
I wanted you to stop it a little bit, just for a second.
Okay. You want to stop it here, or do you want me to back it up?
Yeah, let me talk for a minute, and then maybe I'll have you back it up a little bit.
Okay, go ahead.
What I feel is important about the roll cast, there's two ways I approach a run of fish in a run. Now this guy here, he is, the water is flowing towards him, okay? And if you see a pot of fish that are feeding, what I do is I get kind of greedy. I want to get every fish in that pod, okay? So when I approach this pot of fish like he's doing with a roll cast, my first pass, I want to be just short of the first fish, short of that first fish. So I can judge how much line I got out there. And so what I will do is sometimes I'll get just short of that first fish, but I will have slack in my line. So what I want to do is just go about 2 or 3 feet past that first fish, and then I strip the line towards me, and I'll work that 2 or 3 times on that first fish. Then I'll go after the second fish, and I'll go like 2 or 3 feet past that second fish, so that it's just a little ways past them. And I'll do that 2 or 3 times. And what the roll cast is effective, it helps you judge where that fly is at when you do it. So I just kind of go for the first one, pass it a couple of feet, strip the line, and then I go past the second fish just about 2 or 3 feet, and kind of just land it as close to. And what these fish do is when they come up to feed, they're usually, when you see the tails, they're hitting the dropper fly about 6 inches below the surface. Fish are feeding on a nymph that is rising to the top. So your first fly on there is kind of like an indicator, and I'll have a dropper fly that's about 12 inches below that first fly. And that's what he's going to hit. So I want to do is get that dropper fly just past it. And you got to time his speed. And so when he comes up and catch, you see his tail when he catches, and when he's feeding on this nip that's coming to the top about 6 to 8 inches below the film of the surface of the water, you kind of time it. So the minute you saw him rise, you don't want to go right there right away, because he won't rise for maybe, again, for 3 or 4 seconds. So it's a timing thing. So you want to drop that fly out when you think he's going to come up about 4 or 5 seconds later, than the first time he came up. So you're playing a game with him, and you just don't want to go right to that spot right away. You want to wait till he's coming back up again. And I use that roll cast a lot because I just want to try and pick them off one at a time. And I will do the same thing if I'm fishing upstream of the trout. I never will cast past the whole pot of fish. I'll just get past the last fish and try and pick him off. And then when he hits that, I pull him away from the pod and land him, and that pod will continue feeding. And then after I release him, I go back up the next one, and I pick them off one at a time. So if you're fishing upstream where the fish are upstream, or you pick them off one at a time. If you're fishing the way that guy is there, you don't want your fly to go through the whole pot of fish.
No.
It's called, I call it like fishing by the numbers, where you're nymph fishing or surface fishing. You want to pick them off one at a time. So I call it fishing by the numbers. Guy down at Decker taught me how to do this. He was catching all these fish, and I said, how do you do it? He said, well, I fish by the numbers. And I watched the run that he was fishing in. And he would cast ahead of this little run, and he counts the one, and he raised the line up. The fish are always hitting the nymph coming off the bottom on the rise. They hit on the rise. If you let that cast go all the way down through it, you might get the last one as you go to lift the fly end to redo the cast, because the last trout hit it on the rise. So you go out and you count one, you lift up on the rod as if the nymph is coming up off the bottom, and then you cast back again and you hit one, two, you raise it up again. Cast it out, 1, 2, 3, raise it up, go back. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fish always hitting, if you're feeding just below the surface on the rise. So you want to simulate that rise, but don't let your fly go all the way down through a run, because all that line will do is just scare them, and you want to try and pick them off one at a time. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep. What you're trying to imitate with the nymphs, what's going on, whatever you call it with insects, is they are rising to the surface where they will dry out and fly off. That's what you're imitating. So that's why you always want them to hit the fly on the rise, because that imitates real life.
My saying for catching fish is think like a trout and act like a bug. So what you want to do with that dropper fly, and that's where you catch 90% of your fish, is on the dropper, even though you have a Adam parachute on top, but you might be using 10, 12 inches down an RS2. That's about 6, 8 inches below that. So you're with that rod and line, you make it react like it's your bug. So you got to act like it's a bug, and you got to think how the fish is going to hit that bug. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. One question I have: you say you cast 2 feet away. Is the idea there then the current will take the fly across where the fish are?
Yeah. What you do where this guy is fishing, he's showing you the roll cast.
Right.
But normally, when you approach a run, if you're working downstream, I always work upstream to start with, and then I go back downstream. Normally, you cast out at about a 45 degrees. So when you're looking at some fish that are out there, say you're going upstream, and there's a pot of fish working in the middle of the river there, or where a run is. A run is, there's a boulder there, and the fish are laying behind the boulder. They're lazy. They're never in the current. And so your fly is going around the boulder into that narrow strip. So when you look at the stream, you wear polarized glasses, and the dark area is the deeper part of the stream, and that's where you kind of want to get that fly or nymph, whatever you're working. So
Hey,
I always
Terry.
post it at a 45-degree angle.
Hey, Terry, if you can, would you lean in closer to your camera and microphone? We can hear you better if you get close to the microphone.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to
Thank
point out is the reason that you're fishing behind boulders or some sort of structure is that it takes a whole lot of energy to fight that current all the time. So what the fish do is stay back, behind the boulder where they don't have to fight the current, and they will tend to dart out if they see something they want to eat. Fish have a little computer in their head that calculates how much energy it's going to take to go out and catch that morsel, as opposed to how much calories they'll get to eat. And they need to come out positive if they're going to stay alive. So that's what's going on in the fish's head.
Good idea. Got to think like a fish, huh?
Got to think like a fish.
And act like a bug.
And act like a bug.
Think like a fish, act like a bug, and with all your intelligence and all your equipment, you're overmatched.
Yeah. By something whose brain is this big.
Yeah, about as big as an English pea.
Yep.
But it knows how to do two things really well: not get caught and eat.
Okay, Terry, do you want me to continue with the
Yeah, you
video?
can continue.
You say yes?
Yes, you can.
Okay.
The amount of line in your D-loop affects how much line you can lift. The bigger the D-loop, the more line you can lift off the water. Kicking back, a larger, more dynamic D-loop can be done by adding a haul on the back cast. Adding a haul on the forward delivery will greatly increase line speed and distance. Once you have this two-part static roll cast organized, try running the two parts together in a more fluid continual motion. You'll find that you can create a much more dynamic D-loop and cast much more line.
Oh, that's the end of it. We were about at the end. I didn't
Right.
realize that.
I wa-
Okay.
Just hold it there for a second before you go back. Did
Okay.
you know when he was making that roll cast board, what was his left hand doing that was holding the line? He pulled it back. He pulled down on it and he pulled it back down beside him. So he loaded the rod even more by moving that left hand down and behind him. So watch him when he casts that, what he does with his left hand. Especially go forward a little bit when he was trying to show you how he did the bigger loops. And you watch what he did when he did the bigger loops. He moved his left hand more so than he did when he was just doing the little one.
Right.
Somewhere back here.
No, forward a little bit.
Forward.
Yeah.
Okay,
Then
about
that's a couple of them.
out there.
Yeah, start there and go down a way. And as he's doing this roll, watch his left hand at times.
Okay.
Especially when he's talking about the bigger loops.
Think start slow, finish fast. Don't overpower the stroke. The correct amount of power is always that which just lifts the line and has enough energy to turn it over and straighten it out.
That left hand go down?
Is the next territory.
You say stop.
No, I was trying to tell you when his left hand went down behind but down by his side and behind him a little bit when he did that roll cast.
Yeah.
He's loading the rod more by doing that.
Right, he's
so
loading
more
that
feather.
with his left hand. So it's
Okay.
okay.
One thing I want y'all to notice about the roll cast, if there's no back cast to it, so you're not going to catch the trees behind you or whatever brush there is. And if you're fishing a lot of streams, there are trees and bushes growing because it's close to the water and it's easy for them to stay alive. So you avoid catching your fly in the tree behind you.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Quiet area.
Here are some tips. The amount of line in your D-loop affects how much line you can lift. The bigger the D-loop, the more line you can lift off the water.
Notice this guy doesn't try and cast with his line in the water like that other guy was telling us. He lifts the line off the water. This is the way I think it works.
Kicking back, a larger, more dynamic D-loop can be done by adding a haul on the back cast.
That's what
Adding
I'm
a haul
talking.
on the forward
Right.
delivery will greatly increase line speed and distance. Once you have this two-part static roll cast organized, try running the two parts together in a more fluid continual motion. You'll find that you can create a much more dynamic D-loop and cast much more line.
See what I'm at by? They call it the haul. Hauling
Yeah.
on the line as you go the roll cast.
Right.
And we
Okay.
do the same thing if you're casting behind you. I was telling you where you pull down on your left hand. That's called a haul.
Yep.
When it's above your hand, it's called a single haul. And I fished for bonefish where I had to cast out 120 feet, which on a regular fly rod, it's almost your whole fly line. And I've done a double haul or a triple haul in order to get the line out there 100-some feet. And you really got to use that left hand to load that rod to get it going out there.
Yeah, I have a super beginner question for you guys.
Sure.
So when you're holding on to that line, is there a way to hold it? Is there a way to keep from getting your finger gouged if something hits on it? Like, how are you doing that?
Just hold it between your thumb and your forefinger is what I do. I mean, there's nothing really fancy about it. And you strip it by pulling this way. And when it hits, you got to understand the way what y'all are fishing for fish that weigh a pound and a half. You're plenty strong to hold that. If you're fishing for something a lot bigger, you'd use a different technique.
That makes sense.
Hey, I'm trying to hold this. My thumb's on the top, and I'm using my index finger to hold that line. I don't have any tension because I'm inside here, but I let go, I strip it back, and I loosen my tension with my index finger. But I always want to make sure that that line is between my index finger and this finger right here, so I don't lose it. I kind of hold the rod with my thumb and my two little fingers, and I use my index finger to hold the line, but I use the second finger, my middle finger, so the line doesn't get away from me. I always keep that index finger. So
You
when
follow what he's saying. You're using two hands and you're using two sets of fingers. One of them is going to be that you hold it and then you pull with the other, and you clamp it and then you pull with the other. That's the way you do it.
But so when I open up my index finger, this finger here to let go of it, I don't want that line to fall down. So the second finger keeps the line right there.
Right.
I don't lose it.
Correct.
So you're controlling on your right hand the two fingers. The index finger you use to stop the line, but the second finger you don't want the line to fall on the other side. So you kind of hold it like that. So it takes two fingers to keep the line on the upper part of your hand doesn't get away from you. And then I hold the whole line back here in my other finger, like this, my hand.
Okay, thank you.
When you get into great big fish, and the guys that do really large fish like saltwater fish, they may have in front of them a thing called a stripping basket, and it fills up the line as you strip it, so it doesn't end up in the floor of the boat and you step on it. But that's not going to be anything I'll do. This is the same principle. You want to keep up with where the line's going. The last thing in the world you want to do is step on or get it caught in your rigging, you know, your, something on your vest or whatever. So you need to be sure where it is all the time. And that's the easiest way to keep up with it.
Hey, Terry.
He was talking earlier about spay fishing, and I don't know what that is. If that's a form of fishing you'll probably never do. They do that in Scotland, and they use double-handed rods to catch salmon, and those rods may be 12 or 14 feet long. But these techniques came from that form of fishing.
I have one of those rods too.
Have you ever done Scottish spay fishing? I've never done it.
I have, because I would go surf fishing. My brother, when he was alive, we would fish in the ocean off the coast of Delaware, and I've even done it down in North Carolina when the blues, they call them the blues.
Oh yeah, when the blues run, yeah, I've done that.
Blues run from Florida, they run clear up into New England, and then they come back down in the fall. And it's really interesting. This fade rod has got a handle down here, and you're just, it's like, it's like how we used to handle a cane pole. Ever fish with a cane pole when you were a kid?
Yeah.
You had this long pole, and you had one hand up forward, and the other hand was down below, and you used that to pivot the whole rod. Your left hand was how you let it pivot. It swiveled on that hand. In your right hand, you push the rod, but you're holding the end of the rod, and that was where it swiveled off to your left hand.
Blues are fun, like Terry was saying. They migrate, and they migrate in schools of 1,000 to 2,000 or 3,000. And when you get in them, it's fish after fish after fish. But you got to be careful, because the little suckers will bite you if they get close to you.
If you ever fish in the ocean, the wave will come up on the shore, and as it goes, the water runs back out into the ocean. Right. Before the next wave comes in there, you have this foamy like water.
The trough.
Yeah. Minnows are in there. The minnows are in the wash, where the waves go back and hit the wave coming in. It's called the wash. It's usually kind of foamy, and minnows will hide in there. So these fish will be just off that foamy stuff, feeding on the minnows that as they get washed back out on the undertow of the wave going back under. The wave comes over the top, and the undertow goes down underneath the wave coming in, and right in there is where the minnows hang out. And the blue fish, they're trying to catch these minnows before they can get back up near the shoreline, so the undertow is pushing them back out to sea. Right. And use a two-handed rod. And that rod is my rod is about 14, 15 feet. Takes a lot of energy.
I fished for blues, but it's been further out. It's not been with a fly rod. They run offshore about 100 yards, maybe.
I tell you, I have used those in Colorado. And you know where you use them in Colorado?
Nope.
Where the northern pike are running.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Okay. Now, any of you ever been to 11 Mile? There's a boat ramp there and a pier. Well, in the spring, the northern pike will come up just off the pier. And I use a fly that's about 6 inches.
Wow.
I use a 8-weight rod or a spade rod, and I throw it out in front of that northern pike. You can actually see them in the water out there. And
Do they normally live in the bottom? I've never
well,
caught a
that's
pike.
during the
I don't think I've ever
spawning
seen
time.
it.
This is during the spawning time when they come in to spawn, and they kind of have their own territory, and
Okay.
they're very defensive of their territory. So when you throw this fly out there, they hit it because they're trying to get a female to come into their area. The male is always usually in the shore, and they're trying to get the female to come in there. And so when you throw it out there, and you
What are you imitating with a fly that's 6 inches long, just out of curiosity? Does it look like a fish or what? What does that fly look like?
well, I got some. I'll show you next time when we talk
All right.
about.
I just wonder what it was imitating. That's a pretty big meal.
Well,
Well, we'll see it next
not
time.
imitating anything because what they're doing is the gardener's territory.
Oh, okay. So you're just irritating. It's an irritant, as opposed to food. Yeah, okay.
Right.
I got you.
The same thing is when you fish for bass in the springtime with a fly rod. If you ever, there's a couple ponds over there off near the Platte River, just to the north of 470, and they have bass there in them, and you're not allowed to keep them, but they'll have like a ring. It's kind of a hazy ring where they spawn into, and so when you throw a fly out across that thing, they hit it to chase it out of their nesting spot.
Okay. Yeah.
And I fish the bighorn when the rainbows are spawning, and they'll have a ring too, and they'll chase off whatever kind of going through their nesting spot. The browns spawn in the fall, and rainbows spawn in the spring. Now, in the fall, when the browns come in to spawn, they'll spawn in the fast water. They're out there in the fast water and that's kind of fun too when they come into the fast water. And rainbows at times will spawn in fast water in the spring. A lot of fish spawn in fast water, and that's why sometimes on the endangered species ones, they release a lot of water in the spring so that these endangered minnows, I forget what they call them exactly, can come in and spawn. But a lot of fish will spawn in fast water and in the spring include rainbow.
Well, Terry, I've been fishing for cuts when they were spawning, and that's late June up in the backcountry Yellowstone. It may be because it's how cold it is up there, but that's when I've been fishing for cuts.
Right.
In the backcountry Yellowstone.
But they won't let you do that anymore.
I haven't done it in a while.
Yellowstone Lake, no fishing opens up in Yellowstone Park till July 1st. And
Well, it depends on the outfitter. An outfitter can get a permit to fish in the backcountry. They sell those concessions to 2 or 3 outfitters.
yeah, but for the average person, you can't go.
No, you can't.
Can't fish till after July 1. They want to make sure that you can't fish till the spawning season is over in the Yellowstone or Yellowstone Lake or any of those places. So
Yes.
I fished the Madison in the park and outside the park. I was at West Yellowstone during the year they had the big fires. I got it being no more than 2 blocks away from my motel. The fire was on the other side of the Madison River. Madison River was between my motel and just inside the park. But anyway, Yellowstone used to be my favorite place until it got too crowded.
Right.
I taught my son how to fish. We would go there every July 1st. We'd be we had his favorite spot. And I'd meet these same guys year after year to come the same time too at my favorite spot too. We used to have some conversations about how they tried to push my son out of the hole or something. But anyway. So what do we want to talk about next? You guys got any more questions?
Harry, I got one. You mentioned that you sometimes had cast out 120 feet, the
Right.
full length of the cast of the reel. Why
Right.
where were you when you do that far?
He was
Well, I
bone
was
fishing.
for bonefish down in the Yucatan and places like Belize and some. I've never been to Belize, but you're fishing water that's only about 2 feet deep. Guys on a boat on a platform behind you pulling the boat around, and he's pointing where the fish are and what direction you're moving. And what
You can see the fish because
Uh,
they're longer than 2 feet, and when they feed on the little mollusk and so forth in the sand, their tails stick up. So he has an outboard motor with a platform built on the back of it he's pulling from, and obviously he's up a lot higher, so he can point you where they are. And you may not see what you're casting to because, you know, it's so far away, but he can see them. And that's what Terry's talking about. That's when you really need a long cast. The water's only about 2 feet deep in those flats out in Belize. And I fished for them off the coast of Florida and the Bahamas.
So you don't ever need to cast that far in a river usually.
I actually, the times that I've cast more than 30 yards, I can count on one hand. That doesn't happen. It depends on what you're doing. But as you guys know, I have to fish from a boat because I ride in a wheelchair. So I usually don't cast more than 20, 30 yards in a boat that's moving in the river. So if you can learn to cast 20 or 30 yards, you're fine. If you can learn to do a roll cast effectively, you'll catch more fish than anything else. And if I was going to go fish around here, I'd learn how to roll cast. That's going to be your most effective cast because you cast it under more conditions. It's easier to control. There's less chance of you slapping the water with your fly with that than there is with an overhead cast. Overhead cast is great if you need to cast a really long way, or if you're fishing in a situation where you need to cast over here and then lift your rod and cast in a different direction. You can't change directions with a roll cast. It's hard to do.
When you saw the video, the guy doing the roll cast, if you looked at the far bank, there's some overhanging trees.
Right.
And the roll cast is very effective at getting the fly underneath those trees.
Yep.
And sometimes you can do this roll cast even sideways and roll it underneath there. The fish are either right up against the bank or in the shade. They're never out if the sun is out, they're never in a bright spot. They're always in a deeper spot or in a shady spot. And
the reason for that, again, thinking like a fish, if it's in the sunshine, the birds can see them. The birds will catch them. So they don't want to be where something up high can see it down and see them in the water. So they try and stay in places that are shaded or that have structure over the top of them.
But I floated in a boat down the Bighorn, for example, in the summertime. Sometimes the water is kind of high because they're letting water out for the farmers for irrigation. The water gets pretty high. So we put on a big grasshopper or some type of big bug, and we'll kind of roll cast that thing in right up against the bank. And you watch it with a roll cast, you can actually see how far that fly is. And sometimes you want to stop it before it gets too far up on the shore. And so you watch it and you stop the line and that fly will go in there right up against the shore. And so when you get pretty good, you're watching that fly, and as you roll cast it, you don't want to get too far up on the bank. You stop the line going out, and it'll flop right in there. And
Yeah, so sometimes if you're good, you want to, you know, there will be undercuts where the water's coming, and you want to cast up and get in that undercut because that's where the fish are sitting.
And so the brown trout like to hide undercut. Brown's more than rainbow.
Right.
When that fly gets right above their head on the undercut, it scares the heck out of that trout. And they just come out of there like a rocket. They go right after it because it can scare them. And I used to, before I fly fish, I used to use a spinning rod with a Mepps spinner and flip that thing right in there. I used a closed face reel, not an open face, and I flip that Mepps right in there, and I stop it in midair, and when it came back, the Mepps came back, when it hit the water, it didn't splash. It just spun into the water. But you can do the same thing in high water. You just flip that big lure you have, and they have some flies. They call them. They're this big.
Coming a mouse?
Not a mouse. No,
I fish for fly mouses.
patterns, and they got a name for them. I forgot the name. It's on the tip of my tongue. But they're an extra large fly, and also there's times when we want to use a foam ant or a foam beetle pattern, and we'll want to fish that foam ants or foam beetles up against the bank. And what the trout are, they're back under the bank or in the shaded part, and they're watching the bugs fall off the tree branches onto the water. They're sitting down there watching these bugs actually crawling up and down the tree branches, hoping one will fall down in them. Sometimes they can get that bug before it even hits the water. I watch them do it. And so there's times when we use foam ants and foam beetles.
Right. And the times when you use those imitations like that are usually after a rain because the bugs tend to wash out of the trees and off the bank. And so that's what they're looking for after a rain.
Right. One other tip I'll tell you, I wear a big brim hat like we were talking about the first day. I stay away from standing underneath an evergreen tree. The bugs, those lice or whatever they call it, that land on you, you think it was raining because your body's radiating some heat off it, and the bugs just start falling on you like crazy.
Are you talking about ticks and fleas or what?
Yeah, I wear hats. I never stand under any trees or stuff when the tick season because the ticks fall off and land on you. And it sounds like, honestly, it sounds like it's raining. They fall on you so much, the ticks. That's another reason they have a scarf around your neck, so the ticks don't get down underneath your shirt collar if you're on the shore. There's a lot of ticks in the spring off of trees and brush as you walk.
That's another plug for fishing out of a boat. You don't have that problem.
Well, but I fish not in off the shoreline. Though I'm starting to go to a boat because my legs aren't strong enough to walk.
Yeah, that's me too.
Anyway.
Well, we were talking about rod lakes. Now, if I used to fish some in New Mexico, and the way those streams are, they're cuts and they're very, very narrow, but the banks on either side are not like this. They're going up like that. And so you use a 6-foot rod and you only roll cast because there isn't room to use anything bigger. So it depends on where you're fishing.
Right. Any more questions?
Well, I'd leave them with perfect your roll cast and learn how to strip, and you'll catch more fish. The other's nice and fun, and it looks really fancy, but it's not going to be as productive for you fishing around here as a good roll cast and learning how to strip.
Sounds good, fellas.
Well, show up. You said you were going to show them my fish. We said when we started this, we'd show you what a fish looked like.
Show you what a real fish looks like. You bet. Hang on just a second here.
This is the best salmonoid I ever caught on a fly.
You caught this one?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a 55-pound king salmon.
Wow. That's a big daddy.
Caught in Gastineau Bay, right at the edge of the river. And due to the fact that it was a French name of the bay, we named her Bone Femme, good girl. She was full of roe, getting ready to head up to the stream to spawn. But she was just on the edge of the river, leaving the salt water.
Was that Alaska?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gastineau Bay is right off of Juneau.
Very nice.
Nice fish, real nice.
Okay.
I caught a fish that size, a lake trout, up at Gross Reservoir, which is right above Netherlands.
Yeah, they do get
The
that.
water comes through the Roberts Tunnel, goes through Gross Reservoir to the Denver water thing. And I caught a lake trout that size. And it took us about an hour and a half to get it close enough so we could get them out of the water.
I worked this one for a very long time. You have to be very careful because it depends on what kind of leader you have on it. But if the leader's only good for 10 pounds and the fish weighs 55, you have to play it very, very carefully. Let him run until he gets tired, and be very careful. You never put more than 10 pounds of pressure on it. That's why it takes so long. Those big trouts you're talking about, there are a lot of those in Lake Yellowstone, and you can catch them and keep them last time I checked.
Very good. Well, I learned quite a bit today. Thank you, fellas.
Yes, thank you very much.
Nice hearing two experts talk about it.
Well, if you take my father's definition of expert, he always said an X was a has-been, a spurt was a drip under pressure. So maybe we fit that definition.
That's good. Okay, I see on the outline next week is flies and rigs.
Okay.
Right. I'll talk about how to tie the fly onto the dropper flies and stuff on your leaders, and how to put indicators. We watched the video earlier where the guy talked about fishing with a bobber.
Yeah.
Well, he's a little wrong there, because what we call is a strike indicator. And when we fish that strike indicator, most of the time when the trout hit it, they do not pull that strike indicator below the surface. And so you're watching this indicator going down the string, and if it stops moving, the fish grab the hold of it. They never pull that indicator or a little under the water. It's just going down the river, and it hesitates. The minute it hesitates, you lift up on the fly line. This hesitation. Those trout, they mouth the these nymphs.
Yeah, to see if it's something they want to eat.
And they suck it in their mouth, and the water goes out their gills, the side of their gills. They're just sucking it in. And if they feel that any tension on that, they spit it right out. So all you do is see that indicator just hesitate for a second. You can't turn your eyes away from that indicator if you want to catch a fish. Because 99% of the time, if you look away for less than a second, you miss hooking that fish. So
that's pretty
indicator, and if it just hesitates, just barely hesitates, you lift up on it. The chances are fish grab the hold of that nymph.
That's true for about any of them. As soon as they figure it out, it's not food, they spit it out. So you have to be really, really quick to hook them. And that's where he and I disagree. This maybe is what I learned, but I do a back cast if I feel anything on that rod to set the hook. It works for me.
Right.
And not as much finesse as he has, I'll admit. One thing I want to ask you, Terry, you're going to cover at least a couple of knots, like a surgeon knot and so forth, so they know how to tie a fly on the line.
Yeah, we can cover those.
We only need two or two. I haven't
Do
had
later.
one in a long time. In addition to my other problem, I've got arthritis and I can't do it. Got arthritis and I can't see, so that pretty much takes care of me tying flies on lines. Bring that, if you would bring that big pike indicator, I mean that exciter, I would like to see that fly. The one you said you had for pike,
Sure.
I just like to see it.
Mhm.
Okay.
They're the same type of fly that I use when I go after what's it? Tarpon. Have you ever gone after tarpon?
I have gotten a tarpon on the line, but I horsed it and I broke the line. I broke the tippet. Yeah, he came up, and came out of the water, and he did his head like that, and that was the end of my line.
When you
I used to live in Corpus Christi, and in Port Aransas, there's a place called the Tarpon Inn. Guess how it got its name? So that's where I used to go fish for them.
you got to subconsciously know what you're going to do when you hook a tarpon, because what happens the minute that fish comes out of the water, you put your tip down, you take all tension off that line, and you just kind of lunge forward with the line with no tension on it.
Well, now you tell me 30 years too late.
Ever on that line, he'll throw that fly right out.
Now, I don't know if y'all know what a tarpon is, but it's a big fish. What does a
Yeah.
tarpon weigh? A couple 100 pounds?
Some of them.
Yeah,
One
they're big. They're big fish.
probably only about 75 pounds. They're about 4 to 5 feet. So when they come out of the water, and I want to tell you, you almost feel like you got to throw the fly rod right at them. So there's absolutely no tension. Because if there's any,
Yeah. Well, I'm guilty of that. Boy, he just snapped
they
that line like it was.
or they can throw it out. They shake their
Yep.
head so quick, and it's a different kind of fishing, and you got to do it without thinking. The minute you don't even think about taking all the tension off. It's so fast. You got to do it without one
Yeah.
second.
Well, I did it wrong. That's the only one I ever hooked.
Right.
We were really just fishing for redfish. And that was a surprise.
It's 4 or 5 feet, and it'll clear the water by 2 or 3 feet.
Yeah.
I mean, it is something else when you hook one of those things.
Yep. It's if you're fishing for smaller fish and that comes out of the water, you're a little shocked.
Right.
And to have the wherewithal, if you haven't done it before, to know exactly how to drop the rod. It's just, I was shocked. I didn't have any idea what to do. So he went back to be caught another day.
Right. And their mouths are tough as concrete, and that hook has to be so sharp
Yeah.
to penetrate it.
Well, we actually got a hook in him, but he's, as far as I know, he still has it unless he's been with the dentist.
Well, he probably spit it out, but anyway.
30 years later, he's still got it.
All right, fellas. It was fun. Next week, I guess.
All right.
Have a good week.
Next week.
Bye-bye, all.
You too. See you next
Take
week.
care.
Bye-bye, fellas.
Bye.
Good week.